Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Juan Ayala. First, a couple of announcements. Our website is forbiddenknowledge.news. That's where you find some of your favorite podcasts featured from our community on the Forbidden Knowledge Network. Forbidden Knowledge News is always available on Rokfin, Odyssey, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. Social media is Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Rokfin is where you get our premium content. You also get all the premium content from every creator on Rokfin for only $10 a month. You just click the link in the description or go to rokfin.com/FKN+. That's ROKFIN.com/FKN+. Or like I said, all of our links are right in the description. Today I want to welcome back to the show Juan Ayala. He is an avid researcher, truth seeker, podcaster, and host of the One-on-One podcast, which is a show where he talks about life, current events, esoterica, conspiracy theories, and other mysteries of the universe. He has interviewed a variety of guests on his show, including artists, authors, musicians, and conspiracy theorists. His goal with creating his podcast is to ask the hard questions and share knowledge on certain esoteric subjects. Juan, welcome back. How you doing?
What's up, Chris? Thanks for having me, man. I really enjoy our conversations, and I'm ready to get weird. Can we get weird on this show?
Dude, that's what I'm all about. That's what we're here to do, is get not only weird, we're here to get super weird. Like I was telling you before, I heard you discussing this topic on your show and a few others, and this will get more than weird today for sure. We're going to discuss the concept of the homunculus, and which in modern terms, it basically means little man or representation of a little man and different aspects of that. But in ancient esoteric applications, this may have been something very real and very disturbing. Now, we're going to get all into it. I'd love it if you could give us introduction into the topic. But first, remind the audience about yourself and what led you to research this particular topic.
So I have a podcast, the One-on-One podcast. You can find me on any social media platform pretty much. Instagram is my main one. My website is theoneononepodcast.com. And I also have a publication, The Occultist Monday, where I write about different esoteric subjects. I wrote about the homunculus in this one, actually. I did a whole article on it and some of the history on Aristotelian biology. So you can get that on my website, theoneononepodcast.com. And I also have a comic book with Mark from My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, Chris from Mensa Podcast, The Chosen One versus the Saturnian Cube. On the next one, issue number 2, this is from Paranoid American Comics. On the next issue, we're going to have Sam Tripley in it, and Johnny and XG are actually homunculi in that book. But we have stuff like this. This is Abraxas. So again, it's all esoteric and conspiracy related occult subjects, and every single issue is going to be a different conspiracy theory. You can find that on my website.
That's beautiful artwork too, man. I love that.
Yeah, thank you. So this subject, I was dubbed the rabbit hole master for a little bit, and down these rabbit holes, it gets dark, it gets wicked. And this subject, I came across it while doing an episode for another podcast of mine called The Occult Book Club, where on that show, we cover just obscure and older books, public domain, ancient scriptures, et cetera, just things that people wouldn't be, that aren't mainstream. And we were doing an episode on Manly P. Hall's All-Seeing Eye, which was an inspiration for my journal. And it's just that it's a collection of stories, articles about esoteric and occulted subjects. And in that, there was an article named Homunculi, a piece on homunculi. And it was labeled under a department dedicated to Alice in Wonderland. And I started reading it, and it talks about Paracelsus and this one guy, Kufstein, and hopefully I'm saying that right. I've been saying it a couple different ways. Kufstein, Count of Kufstein, whatever. I looked him up, and I came across this other thing. But in this story, it talks about how he was able to make 10 homunculi, and he had a king, a queen, an architect, a monk, a miner, a nun, a seraphim, a knight, a blue spirit, and a red spirit. And I was like, what is this concept? Because it's science fiction. Whenever we think of some concept like this, making a little miniature human being, which that in Latin homunculi means miniature man or miniature human man. And a homunculus is a woman, a small woman. So you have the homunculus and the homunculus, but the homunculus isn't really used a whole lot. So when I looked this guy's name up, and in this story, he was a Freemason, a Rosicrucian, secret society type, and he only had the homunculi at his lodge. Right? He was only able to have them at his lodge. So it's kind of weird. Whatever. I've heard things about that before, where you're only able to breathe fire at your lodge for some particular reason. I don't know why, but this guy apparently they all died. You know, some fell to their death. Some others tried to escape. Some were killed, but essentially he had these little magical men. Now there's various types of homunculus. Okay. The one that I focus the most on, which is the one that intrigues everybody the most, is the alchemical homunculus, but there are various versions of it. And in this story, one of the homunculus was able to tell the future, which is part of this whole thing. It's so bizarre because you have the homunculus concept of like a magical little human person that you can do magical things with. And then you have the aspect of the grimoires, which are recipe books, essentially for magical practices. So when I looked up this Kufstein guy, I came across this other piece that was super bizarre, like crazy bizarre. It's called the Liber Vacay. It's the Book of the Cows. Now, grimoires, when they popped up, they were instructional manuals on how to do certain magical works. There's for necromancy, for you name it, divination, whatever. There's a grimoire on it. Now, the one that I came across, which really piqued my interest, like crazily, because I think that's what everybody likes about true crime, right? The gory details. I think that's why people are so gravitated towards the Dahmer thing. I think there's more to that, and I can relate it to this whole homunculus thing, because the homunculus topic is 3 to 4 degrees of separation from any major topic, at least on Wikipedia. On the top 100, it's 3.92. Somebody did the math, bro. Somebody did the math on the topic of homunculus and how far away, how many degrees of separation it is from any major, a top 100 topic on Wikipedia and top 50 topic on Wikipedia. So again, it's very closely related. And so, you know, that's the whole thing with the alternative thought community. You can stretch things a little bit, but it starts to make you connect dots that you wouldn't otherwise connect. So when I came across this Liber Vacay, it is a pseudo-Platonic text. Now, back in these times, when you are talking about heretical and blasphemous things like this, where there is bestiality involved, there is, again, dissecting of animals, killing even potentially of human beings, because in some of the recipes it requires the fresh brain of a dead corpse. Now, how'd you acquire that is the whole thing, right? Now, I'm not saying go out and do these things. I'm simply a scholar. This could also be coming from the symbolic point of view. But there's always going to be that one hillbilly, that one Florida man that's going to come out and he's actually going to try these things. Like, hey, I wonder what happens if I actually get all these things together.
Yeah, man, that part is so confusing to decipher what is like symbolic and what is actually being taught as some kind of practical use or science. And it makes you think, why would this ever be symbolic of anything? What could this possibly be symbolic of? And, I kind of swayed to the possibility that there were people, probably more than we think, trying to make little homunculumen.
I've got a couple, and I've gotten into sort of debates with friends of mine on the topic of, is this literal or is it metaphorical? Is it symbolic? What is it? I'm in the opinion that it is literal, for the reason being that the Liber Vacay is not an alchemical text. It's not an alchemical text. If you look at in alchemy is its own 3-hour, 4-hour episode because it's wild. But alchemy essentially is working with material matter in order to affect reality and be able to step outside the fabric of reality. And I like the I have a quote here by Falconelli, which he really puts it beautifully. He says, "The secret of alchemy is this: there is a way of manipulating matter and energy as to produce what modern scientists call a field of force. The field acts on the observer and puts him in a privileged position vis-a-vis the universe. From this position, he has access to the realities which are ordinarily hidden from us by time and space, matter and energy. This is what we call the great work, the magnum opus," which, again, you are stepping what they wanted to do. The alchemists, they wanted to remove the impurities of matter, and the goal was to resurrect the material world back then, right? They wanted to, it was more of a philosophical, there's the actual aspect of working with these flasks and mixing. I call it guys just boiling their own piss. That'll probably piss some people off, but it's just a bunch of dudes just boiling their bodily fluids
Right.
together, whatever. You know, I got some people who are
Throw a
who
little
are
spit semen
friends-
in there, a little blood, you know.
Yeah, what? Yeah, exactly. But you say that, but the Picatrix, if you look at, it's another grimoire. It uses all bodily fluids. Uses your semen, uses your blood, uses your feces, uses your urine, everything, and each and every single thing and mixture has an outcome. So again, it gets very weird because you have those people who are trying this. You have those people who are like, hey, if you make a mixture of this, this, and this, you're gonna get this. And that's where, again, the homunculus comes into play. But I stand at the in the school that this wasn't an alchemical text. It was magia naturalis, which what they called natural magic, Christian natural magic. Now, what that means is that you are using what nature is giving you, and this is why Christians practiced it, because hey, God gave us plants. He gave us everything that we have at our disposal, as long as we're not using astrological or astral magic, which is using entities, right? Like outside the, demons, right? The grimoire, whatever other, as long as you didn't have another entity assisting you in whatever you wanted to do, you were good. You were only either slowing a natural process that would already happen by itself or speeding it up. And this is where the putrefaction aspect of it comes into play, where back then they believed that there was Aristotelian biology. There is spontaneous generation where you get A plus B equals C. So you take, A plus B equals C, whatever. You take the sperm and you put it in a flask and you put it into the womb of a cow, and in 40 days you get a homunculus, right? That's what they thought, spontaneous generation. Then there was sexual generation, which it was the coitus, right? Intercourse between man and woman. And now back then they were really misogynist. Aristotle thought that women were only an incubator, that they only contributed the material matter to the creation of a baby, which we now know that is wrong. But Aristotelian biology was very influential up until the 18th century. So these guys aren't just any people. They're not just hillbillies in the Hills Have Eyes County somewhere mixing their sperm into flasks and stuff. No, these are highly academic minds. These are the most influential minds of eternity, like Paracelsus, which is the guy who coined the term homunculus. Now, when I talk about the homunculus, I'm going to be talking pre-Paracelsus, okay? This is the guy, they never referred to it as a homunculus. Some people referred to it as a rational animal. Some people referred to it as some sort of beast, but they never said homunculus. Okay, that came into the 16th century. The Liber Vacae, back to the Liber Vacae, because again, this topic is crazy, bro. That's why I was telling you before the show, where do you want to go with it? Because it's crazy. The Liber Vacae is from the 9th century AD. And back to this natural magic thing, where as long as you're not using outside influences to aid you in your process, you're good. So that's exactly what this grimoire is about, is taking things. For example, I'm going to read the book is broken up into 80 experiments. Now, the crazy thing about it is that they were never published. There are over 16 manuscripts, and even John Dee had a copy at one point. The John Dee, okay? And obviously, I mean, I wouldn't doubt it, since he had the biggest library in Europe at his time. He had the biggest collection of books ever for his time. He had a copy of it. But what I really find disturbing is either somebody gifted it to him or he was able to acquire from somewhere, or he copied it, because a lot of the copies that exist of the Liber Vacay are handwritten. And what that insinuates is that the people who were copying it were either doing it in secret, so occulted, for personal use to study later on, right? Or they were trying to do it in a secret way, so people wouldn't know. So they were all these little handwritten books with the instructions of how to make this rational animal, what pseudo Plato calls rational animal.
Now, I'm assuming these books had not only the experiments and rituals, but the actual results after the fact, right?
Everything, yeah, whatever they were passing on. And here's the thing, dude. So there's over 16 manuscripts, right? There's in Arabic, there's in Latin, there's various translations of it, because again, it was going around. This is a real thing. This is a real esoteric subject. Some esotericists have done their thesis on this subject. So these books are everywhere. And what they were doing, because back then, if you were to come out with this sort of thing, you'd be killed. Okay, you'd be ruled a necromancer. You'd be hung. You'd be doing, this is blasphemous. How could you do this sort of thing? What they would do is they would copy pieces of this book, this manuscript, and they would put it in with legitimate works at libraries. So they would have a medical journal, and they would slip in, a piece of the Liber Vacay in there, as to, again, to hide it. Plus, they were using pen names, so pseudo Galenic, pseudo Plato, pseudo Aristotelian. They were using high minds in order to hide behind the pen name, right? So, hey, this is pseudo Plato. I'm not putting my name on it. Nobody's publishing it. I'm gonna be the first sorcerer, whoever doctor, to put this out, and I'm gonna pass it into either my secret society friends or my occulted circle, whatever it was, and they would pass it on with each other. But there's a disturbing amount of references to this work in other grimoires, and there's again over 16 manuscripts, which are little pieces. A lot of them are fragmented, and we get translations varying, here and there. But point being that they would hide it with legitimate works. They would slip in a piece of the Liber Vacay. Some copies existed by themselves, the full 80 experiments. Some people that would copy it would omit details because they thought it was that blasphemous. So that's why I tell people it's his story, because even people back then who were copying this sort of magic, they felt the need to omit certain details in it because it didn't adhere to their beliefs or, the church at the time or whatever it was. So they're like, okay, I'm going to copy all 79 out of 80 experiments. So we don't even know what we've lost because of that. And again, it's his story because of the victor of the spoils. So when people are, again, I don't want to bash religion, but when people are going about, ancient scripture has been translated and regurgitated over and over again. So you're getting a watered down idea of whatever it is that you're believing in, essentially, right? Not 100%. To bash anybody, but that's just the reality of things. So the Liber Vacay took its inspiration from what they believe was there's this ritual. Virgil, right, in his work Georgics, wrote about a ritual called Begonia. Now, in this Begonia ritual, it was for the generation of bees. And what you needed to do in that was take a cow and you beat it to a pulp, right? You beat it to a pulp, and you're gonna, you break all its bones. You can't break its skin. It's very poetic when you read it. So a lot of scholars said, hey, this is metaphorical. A lot of guys were like, hey, this is literal. So you take a 2-year-old cow, you beat it to death, and you have to pulverize it, right? So you're pulverizing, you don't break the skin. That's it. That's very important. And then you let it sit for, I think it was 40 days. I'm trying to find it here, for 40 days, however long it was, in an enclosed house or an enclosed space, wherever it may be. And after a while, bees are going to generate from the body, from the carcass of this.
Now, in these rituals, doesn't the house have to be facing a certain direction? I've heard of this before. Like they had the windows have to be facing east, or some kind of weird thing whenever you're using these certain structures as for your housing of your ritual, right?
Yeah. One thing that people really tend to forget about, which I'm real big on, is architect architecture as used as talismans. Architecture plays a very big role when it comes to magical practices. And one of the ones that is probably most familiar to people, if they haven't heard it or have, is the work of Abramelin. Now, the reason I bring him up is because Crowley, however you want to say it, he was trying to do that ritual. And it was on a house on Loch Ness, which maybe he opened up a portal to another dimension. That's where you get the Loch Ness monster from. But essentially, the house needed to be the Boleskine house needed to be a certain facing a certain direction, a certain number of windows on a certain side. You know, it was to a template because again, back then they were using buildings as talismans for magical purpose. If you look at a church, they've even argued that it amplifies the miracles that are happening within certain churches. Okay, that's history. That's not, you know, there's churches that were like, hey, the reason that this biological change happened in somebody and a miracle happened was because of this architecture, either the resonance or the ley lines, whatever, I don't know, but I do believe that architecture is used as a talisman, right? Which again would hint at talismanic magic, which is the pick a tricks using outside influences to infuse powers into certain things. But yes, absolutely, it is very crucial. And in this one, it was 14 small windows on the eastern side. You see, and that's on the Liber Vitae. So, being inspired by Virgil's Begonia, the ritual of Begonia, where you beat a cow to a pulp and you get the generation of bees through putrefaction. When the carcass was rotting, they believed back then, again through observation, if you put out a piece of meat to sit outside and you let it sit there, it's going to create maggots. From the maggots come the flies. So they thought like, wow, the hen is actually sitting on top of the egg to putrefy it. And from the putrefaction is where the little baby chick comes from. We now know that's not true, but that's what they were observing back then. Like, okay, she's heating it up, so it rots, and from this rotting, you get new life. That's what they were thinking about.
Right.
So the Liber Vitae, and this is where it gets graphic. And this is the part that everybody loves. And it's not even, it doesn't have anything to do with the homunculus. It's the last experiment of 4 that talk about creating a rational animal. And I start with it first because it's the Liber Vitae, the book of the cow.
Now, can I ask you, how did you connect rational animal with homunculus? Is it just basically the same definition throughout history that you were looking at?
So the way that the term homunculus was coined in the 16th century with Paracelsus. They never mentioned, they mentioned similar things, and that's just in this grimoire, the Liber Vitae, what they call it, a rational animal. I'm trying to recall what they called it in Jabirian, which is another type. He called it, let's see here, they call them like animals never seen before. Let's see here. I'm trying
kind of like a chimera,
yeah, exactly like a chimera. But the name simply comes from what pseudo Plato called it. Now, when you start to read it, well, the translations at least, because I'm going based off translations of other scholars. When you read the text or the subject, you can say, okay, well, this is a little person, like a homunculus.
Yeah.
But again, the homunculus didn't come into the word homunculus didn't come to fruition until the 16th century, which is very important. So we're talking about a rational animal here. Now, I'm going to read the 4th experiment that gives you instructions how to generate bees.
Right.
So you start off by taking a cow and building a house with 14 windows on the eastern side. Then you must seal them all shut, behead the cow, drain all of its blood, and reattach the head again. And so far, so good. You then sew shut the mouth, the eyes, the ears, nose, anus, and vulva. And this is where it's going to start to get a little bit weird, because you have to beat the cow. Now, you have to beat the cow similar to Virgil's Begonia ritual to generate bees. But instead, in this one, it's very specific because it says you have to take the biggest dog penis you were able to find. And I'm going to read the translation. Take a big dog's penis and incessantly beat the cow with it until its flesh is discolored and its bone is broken. Now, sounds very weird, right? A dog's penis. And
yeah,
I said, hey, how do you go about finding the biggest dog penis? Where do you go and search for the biggest dog? How do you know you've got the biggest one? I mean, maybe once you start beating this cow with this penis, you see another dog, you're like, wow, that's a big
good
penis.
question. Yeah.
So after this step, you are to split the cow's skin after 7 days and remove the marrow-like substance, which you must then grind up with an unknown herb. Now you take this mixture, you put it in the corner of the house where it'll eventually become worms. And every day thereafter, you need to open the window and throw a handful of powdered bees at the worms until you have living bees. Now, if you do this in reverse, you get a cow. So everything I told you, if you do it in reverse, you get a living cow from bees. This is the Liber Vacay, okay? This is what some scholars have called the most flagrantly demonic text that there are. Now, there are scholars who have referred to a homunculus as an artificial demon of some sorts. But I'm going to have to disagree from my research because, again, you're not using outside influences in order to make the homunculus. You are literally using a dog penis, which you can find in nature, a cow, which you can find in nature, powdered bees, which you can find in nature, an unknown herb, which I'm sure you could find in nature, and putting it all together. So spontaneous generation, A plus B equals C, right? A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So now I'm going to talk about the homunculus recipes, but it's not referred to it as a homunculus.
Before you move to that, what happens, after you throw your powdered bees into the mix and everything is done, you just automatically start to grow a little man, or what happens? What's the last step here?
That was for the generation of bees. That's to get bees.
That's the bees. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that's just to get bees. That's the fourth experiment of the first four on the major side. So it's a major and a minor. There's 80 experiments in total. Now, one of the things that really stood out to me because I'm just picking out the homunculus aspect of it because it's very intriguing. It blows your mind. You're like right now you're trying to calculate, like, what are you saying, bro? What are you trying to get at? And I have to stress that
I'm trying just to imagine some ancient dude in a robe, like beating a cow with a dog dick and shit. It's like, nah, dude, what's going on?
Well, we're gonna get to some modern day stuff that I believe was for that. I mean, it's gonna get weird, bro. But one of the things that really stood out to me was that in this grimoire, because it's 80 experiments, the first half is what the author calls exoteric. So how to make illusions, how to make a lamp that doesn't turn off, how to grow plants quicker, how to make it rain, how to do stuff that he calls exoteric. Everybody should know this. And then the major side is more esoteric and occulted. And one of the things that really stood out to me was there are methods to make armies, giants, and other forms appear in the sky. And I said, well, that sounds a lot like Project Bluebeam. Like, is it Project Bluebeam some sort of magic from some grimoire, or is it some technology? Because I think science and alchemy and all this stuff has just changed names throughout the time. Quantum physics and all these things. I think it's, the spooky action at a distance. I think that's all magic. You know what I mean? They don't know how to find a name for it. I think it's all the same thing. It's just evolved throughout time. Because back then, physicians and magicians were the same people. They were seen as the same because a physician was only exposing what was in nature in order to speed up whatever process you had to heal yourself. So here I am as a doctor exposing this medicinal plant to give to you, Chris, to make sure that whatever ailment you have is sped up and cured quicker. So I'm only exposing what's in nature. So physician and magicians back then were the same, cut from the same cloth. Same thing with architects. Architects were magicians. It was all again, magic was very intertwined with. Now, somebody asked me if I believe that this was like a metaphysical thing or a literal thing. I think both. And we'll get into another. I'm jumping off the deep end right now, and I'm gonna bring us back to shore to really cool us off for a little bit and go through the history of how we got here. So, but you have it shows you how to construct different kinds of magical houses wherein people will suffer epileptic seizures, start to tremble, hallucinate, or die. It instructs you how to be able to speak to birds or make lamps that can't be turned off. So there's a lot of things in this grimoire that it doesn't just stop with the homunculus, which is really weird, or the rational animal, but it goes into a whole bunch of other things, which I found super, super interesting. Now, that was the first experiment, generating dead bees.
Okay.
Now we're gonna get to the rational animal, and this is a quote: "Whoever wishes to make a rational animal should take his own water while warm, that's your sperm, and let him mix it with an equal measure of stone that is called stone of the sun. It is a stone that shines at night like a lamp until the place in which it is found is illuminated." Now, there are some cryptic things going on here. I don't know what the stone of the sun is. I am speculating it's some sort of meteorite, because back then, the transmutation of lead into gold, a lot of people said that it was attributed to a meteor rock, right? That's why they were never able to reproduce it, because it came from outer space. And so I'm in the boat that's a meteor of some kind, because it shines, right? It makes you think of sci-fi movies when it crashes, it's all shiny and stuff. Mm-hmm. So after this, you must take a cow or a ewe. Its vulva is cleansed with medicines and its womb made capable of receiving what is put in it. If a cow is used, the blood of the ewe is put on its vulva, and vice versa. So if you use the other one, you put the blood of the cow on its vulva. So the orifice is then plugged with the stone of the sun. After this, the animal is put in a dark house. Here's the architecture again. In a dark house, and every week it is given a pound of the other animal's blood to eat. One must then take some sunstone, as much sulfur, as much magnet, as much green tutia. He should grind them, mix them with willow sap, and dry in shadows. Again, very cryptic. So a lot of people are like, hey, this is metaphorical. Maybe.
Yeah.
When the cow or sheep gives birth, one must take that form and put that in the powder that you just made with the other stuff. And once you do that, it's going to grow some skin over it. So here you have this little man. This is why it's like, wait, they don't call it a homunculus, but it's going to grow skin. Okay. Then it should be put into a great glass or lead vessel. After 3 days, it will become hungry and it will start to move around. Therefore, feed it from that blood that has gone forth from the mother for 7 days. Then the animal form that is agreeable to many miracles will be finished. So you have a magical little person, a magical thing, a magical rational creature. This being can be used to change the course of the moon, change oneself into a cow or sheep. So it makes you think why some cultures don't eat cows or pigs or stuff. Again, it's just connecting some dots. And if you take this form and feed it and nourish it for 40 days and feed it with the blood and milk, nothing else, and the sun does not see it, you may then vivisect it and use its fluids to anoint your feet, whereon you can walk over water. Finally, if a man has raised it and nourished it until a whole year and left it in milk and rainwater, it will tell him all things that are absent. So
that is so insane,
ominous, very weird, right?
Yeah, and I know you'll probably get to this, but it makes me think of the Jewish mythos of the Golem, where they were kind of breathing life into this inanimate thing that they use, usually clay or whatever, and it actually came to life. But this was something way more organic, and I don't want to say natural because there's nothing natural about this, but it seems to be an organic type of organism that comes out of this cow, if we're to take this literally.
Yes. So some people have disagreed with me that the golem is it is a form of they say that the golem inspired the homunculus, and the homunculus inspired and the golem too inspired Frankenstein, and you have all these other things, right, which we can talk about later. But yeah, absolutely, it is sort of the golem is more on the AI cybernetic side of it, where it is programmed to do one thing and one thing only. But keep in mind, as we move along here, what I believe after the 16th century is, and that story that I told you about at the beginning was from the 18th century, by the way, of the Kufstein. So we have, I'm telling you right now about the 9th century. I'm going to get later on the 2nd century BCE, maybe as far back as the 8th century BCE, where there's another form of a homunculus, the Chinese homunculus, which I'm going to touch on real quick. But the next two experiments after the one that I just finished, it's essentially the same thing, except you're using the matrix. One of them is the female monkey, and the other is the womb of an unidentified animal. Now, in some versions of this, there you need to penetrate the animal. Okay, so it gets very, there's bestiality involved. And some of them they say inseminate it. Some other ones again. So it's really weird that, and I'm sure people were trying this. I'm sure 100%
Oh
people
yeah,
were trying this.
100%. People are still doing that shit, but you know.
Yeah, exactly. People are still doing that. So, an ointment made from the eyes and brain of the homunculus birthed by the monkey allows you to see spirits and demons. And this is the only reference to any other sort of entities, so demonic entities or whatever, that involved in any of these things, right? It's like because people want to argue that it is an artificial demon, but this is the only reference made to spirits and astral things. And drinking a brew made from its tongue allows you to talk to the entities. Using its liver makes trees bend over. Using its brain, the brain of a fresh human corpse on a dead tree can make it flourish instantly. Using the guts of a homunculus bird by the unidentified animal can make you impervious to pain. Using its heart wrapped in the skin of its forehead makes you invisible. And burning powder made from its body can make it rain. And finally, if you bury this powder in the ground for 14 days, the powder will give birth to extremely poisonous snakes. So very, very weird. There's also another set of experiments to generate hybrid animals. So a cow with the face of a human,
Wow.
worms that look like snakes, bees that look like worms, and a final animal that if you use the fat as an ointment, you can permanently transform a person into a pig or an ape. Very weird.
Insane.
And people still haven't been able to decipher what this means. Now, if it is a cryptic and cipher, and cipheric, I guess, if it is a cipher,
maybe.
we don't have the keys to understand what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, I don't believe it is a cipher. I think it is meant to be taken at face value, just due to the fact that it's not an alchemical text per se. But some people will disagree. I mean, we're never going to really know. As the experiments progress, it is the mixture of more and more animal and human substances and mixtures of various matrices. So sheep, cow, monkey, you name it. Now, I forgot what I was going to say, but anyways, David Pingree considered the Librevike the most flagrantly demonic of the Arabic books on magic, and he called the homunculus an artificial demon of some sorts. But again, it's considered natural magic, so it's not goetic magic or astral. And
so in theory, you'd get this thing, this little man or whatever would come out and essentially kill it eventually and use its parts and its blood for different magical practices and rituals, right?
to be like God. That's the goal of this whole thing, to make a magical human being, or not human being, a magical talisman of some. It's a talisman, and using it for your magical purposes. Now, the way that you attain that talisman, you have to follow these specific instructions. Now, there's various ways we can go about it. It's very Kabbalistic. As above, so below. It being a small man is, again, the micro for the macro. So it also has to do with Galenic physiology, where every single different body part was attributed to a certain power. There are cannibal traditions that people would, eat the eyes of a person to absorb whatever. We hear all those stories of the barbarians and all this, doing different things. Certain tribes keeping the heads of certain people for what, as a trophy. So there's that aspect to it as well. But the story of the homunculus, you can relate this even to the Anunnaki. When the Anunnaki take the sperm of a man and put it into a matrix of the Anunnaki woman to make what is now the slave race, some sort of. And if you really want to look at it, we were homunculus compared to them because allegedly they were giants, right?
Yes.
So
that's one of the first things I thought of when you were telling these stories is the mythos of the Anunnaki and their abilities to create what we are compared to them is just little men.
Yeah, exactly. So you have in the story of Genesis, the Lord formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed in his nostrils life. You have Prometheus, he shaped man out of mud. And these are what some people would consider golems, because again, they're from the clay. And depending on which religion you want to go, but it's all throughout almost all the major religion origin stories. It's some sort of man made out of clay or whatever it is. And the ultimate power that everybody knows about is that God has the ability to give life and take it, which is something that man has been after. Right? We have this technology where we're able to edit or even clone DNA. Right? We have the first human clone. I didn't even know, and so I started looking into this. Was created in November 1988, and the embryo that was allegedly destroyed after 12 days was half man and half cow.
No.
We just finished talking about the cow, and where the word vacay, if you look at the etymology of that word, it relates to something else that has been in the media as of recently. I'm not going to say what it is, but you can take a guess what that might be.
For sure.
So makes you wonder, right? I also want to note that cloning is illegal in a lot of countries. Now, if something is impossible to do, why would you make it illegal? Okay. Now it's say as I do, say as I do. What's the saying? Do as I say, not as I do. Whatever. Anyways, so this idea of usurping the position of God can be traced back to the creation story in the book of Genesis. And I take Genesis because, again, I was raised in a Christian background and I look at everything from a Christian perspective, I guess. One of the OGs, you have Greek stories about Pygmalion where this is a little bit different, but he fell in love with a statue he had carved. Now, I think that's invoking some sort of energy, especially in the new Netflix show with Dahmer, where allegedly it happened in real life, but he takes the mannequin and he like lays in bed with it or whatever. So again, this guy in this Greek story falls in love with the statue that he made because it was so beautiful, and then you have Dahmer taking statues and caressing them, or mannequins, right? So I don't know, it's some weird occult. I think that they want to take fiction and stories and reality and they intertwine them together. I think that's part of the alchemical process as well.
100%.
That's a whole different episode. And then we have the parallels of Daedalus and his statues. You have the creation of Pandora, where she was created again as some sort of golem. You have William Shakespeare writing about the same thing, a golem. You have Pinocchio, which is like a animated little, again, homunculus, a statue of, because the OG homunculus was the voodoo doll, the representation of a man, the simulacra of a man. Now, it's got to do with image magic and sympathetic magic, where if you infuse, again, back to the talismanic magic, if you infuse the image of somebody with this simulacra of them, whatever you do to this voodoo doll, which we've all seen in pop culture, right, with movies and stuff like that, you're able to affect the person in real life. That was the OG homunculus.
Yeah. Now,
people took it a step, because that's why I said I'm focusing on the alchemical homunculus, which is artificial life in an alchemical lab. But just so you get an idea of the evolution of where this is coming from. And so you have Pinocchio, and then, of course, the Frankenstein's monster, which it's fiction, but that's up for interpretation. Now, according to Paracelsus, who we'll talk about in a little bit, the homunculus is the image or figure of a small man with every limb and shape like a man. It is based on the idea that the external shape and form of an object reveals its internal properties and powers. So as above, so below. Again, this very hermetic principle, Kabbalistic, whatever you want to call it. Thus, the homunculus as an image of a man possesses all abilities and powers of man. For a hidden human nature is concealed in it in a spiritual way. It is thus possible for this image to perform all operations of man completely. Now, it makes you think of the effigy that they were burning at the Bohemian Grove. What were they trying to invoke with that? Were they doing, it was in the shape of a person, so it could be called the homunculus. Okay, there's various definitions of a homunculus. Another definition, one that I like, an artificial human created by magic. A homunculus does the bidding of its creator. You have the Golem, Frankenstein's monster. You have in Faust by Wagner, when he makes the homunculus with Mephistopheles, again using out, but that's more of a demonic type of homunculus because Mephistopheles helped him make it. It only ever worked when Mephistopheles was there, and Mephistopheles is a demon, so I don't
It
know.
also makes me wonder if it links the homunculus itself links in any way to like what we would consider fairies or little people or small creatures, you know.
It is, and that's under the Paracelsus. I'm telling you, bro, this topic goes deep, dude. When I started researching, I was like, "What in the world?"
Because maybe what if we create these things and they decide, "Nah, I don't want you to be my master," and they take off and have their own little magical lives. Yeah, cryptids.
Yeah, absolutely. And in psychology, we have the cortex man, which I'm sure people have seen it. And can I share?
Yeah, you're good
picture
to share
here. Let me find the picture of it. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen here. I got a few pictures. So can you see this here? So this is the cortex man. This in psychology is what they call a homunculus. Now, it is a neural map of the human brain and what it controls in the body, right? So they say that at first, kids put stuff in their mouth. So you start with your motor functions first and move to the mouth. That's why little babies put things in their mouth to start feeling. That's how they develop their senses. And then you had back then, again, the representation of a man either through a mandrake plant. I believe this is a mandrake, or mandragora, I think it's called, where it looked like a human. They say that also these would sprout from the sperm of a man that was just hung. So if they hung a person, they executed him, and his sperm fell to the ground, in that spot that the sperm fell would grow a plant that looked like a man. Again, very weird. Very weird. Man. There was an entire market for these sort of things back then where they would paint them with faces. They would put teeth on them because they believed that there were actual homunculi. They believed that there were actual homunculus, and they attributed them to good luck. So there was an entire market of false little homunculus, if you will, for a long time. And it got like really big for one point. And then obviously here we have the alchemical homunculus, which is I believe a representation, and you see various pictures of it throughout history. So in psychology, you have that, right? The cortex man. And then also, in neuroanatomy, you have the cortex man. In psychology, there's something called the homunculus argument, which they wondered why we see what we see. So they said, okay, in our head, there's a little person that's watching everything that we're watching now. So a little homunculus, a little version of us in our head, but then what's in its head? And then what's in that homunculus's head? So it was ad infinitum. So there was a homunculus inside of a homunculus, like the Russian dolls.
Yeah.
Where it's like a little one, a big one. So, and then you have the cortical homunculus, which is the one that I just showed you. And of course, the alchemical 16th century homunculus, that is a being that alchemists were rumored to have successfully artificially created life through the art of alchemy. But they say that the whole magnum opus to alchemy was the creation of lead to gold. The Philosopher's Stone, we have all these different iterations of it. The elixir of eternal life. I believe that it was the creation of artificial life at the end of it. Because think about it. If you're able to create this magical person and use its body for magical purposes, why would you want a Philosopher's Stone? Or why would you want gold? And then if you think about how you're saying these fairies and all this stuff, well, Paracelsus argued that if you would let a homunculus grow into the wild, it would become mythical creatures. So like a dwarf, or I think of, dude, like my buddy put me onto this. Shout out to homie Romy from the Rising from the Ashes. He put me on the leprechaun. If you think about the leprechaun is a little person that takes you to what? To gold. So it's alchemical. It's the little man that takes you to gold, which John Dee and Edward Kelly, they were going around and collecting dirt samples for the angels so that the angels would tell them where the gold was. So you had people who were using grimoires because certain entities would show them certain things. So this entity was to show you, to tell you the future. This other entity was to help you find hidden treasure. This other entity was to help you to talk to animals. It was different entities, and that's why I think it's a lost technology. I don't think that it's I think it's lost its potency from the beginning to now because of the evolution of magical
Well, it
systems.
makes you wonder, maybe it hasn't. Maybe it's even stronger, and they just use it for the deepest, darkest of black projects and integrated it with modern technology somehow, and that's actually one of the most frightening things you could consider.
Did you see, I think it was on TikTok, where there's this phenomenon going around with the AI art where it gets like this lady looking entity in it, and they call, I forgot what they called it, but anyways, what it's hinting at is that they've created the first AI cryptid, where if you see it, yeah, dude, I'm gonna have to send you the video because it's like 2 minutes long. But again, how you're saying, I 100% believe in that, where I think that these entities are able to incarnate themselves through technology and use technology in some sort of way to manifest into this reality. I'm on board with you 100%. So this idea, all these ideas that we're talking about, they actually originated with who I call Daddy Pythagoras. He was the one that came up with the term spermism. And the idea of spermism is that the father contributes everything to the offspring, while the mother is only a material substrate. I know that sounds really bad, but hey, that's what these guys were a product of their time.
Right.
And then Aristotle took Pythagoras' ideas, which Pythagoras was also the one who invented eugenics, and he elaborated on it, and it lasted until the 18th century, which is the scary part of it. So these guys are, all their ideas that they were misogynist and racist and all that stuff, it lasted until the 18th century. And we know that racism is still alive today. And what was it, 50 years ago we had slaves? So, you know, we have a very dark history, you know, to say the least. Yeah. And I mentioned earlier spontaneous generation, sexual generation, and the idea of Aristotle thought that lice came from inside the body because the body was too moist on the inside. Again, they're watching these things come out of a person. They go, oh, it's because he's too moist inside. He's got too much humidity inside of him. That's where the lice is coming from. Yeah,
and it's probably stemming from a lot of my problems. just too moist inside.
Yeah, too moist. That word makes me really uncomfortable.
Even though we're like 90%, 70% water or some bullshit. I don't know.
Yes,
it's pretty moist.
Like yeah. So with all this said, Aristotle didn't believe that humans could be born outside the womb, you know, without the father and the mother. But of course, you're always going to have the Florida men and the hillbillies who are going to try anyways. And that's what led us to the Liber Vacay and, you know, everything after that, because they were going crazy with it. They were like, you know what, let's put it in this cow to see what happens. Let's put it in this jar to see what happens. Let's put it in this and that. And they were just going crazy with it, trying to make artificial life. And it got into, again, alchemical means and all these other stuffs. And I want to talk about the little golden man, because that is probably the oldest concept of a homunculus. And I want to say concept because it's not 100% put out there. You have Zosamos, which is later on in Egypt. But the little golden man, which related to Taoist or Taoist alchemy, is Chinese alchemy. Now, mind you, these guys were swallowing mercury to try and live forever at one point. Okay, so they were trying to do whatever possible. That's why I'm telling you, there was people who were going to try this. They were doing whatever possible in order to live forever. So they were literally putting together concoctions with mercury and all sorts of chemicals to try and live immortality. But the Taoist homunculus, which is Chinese alchemy, some people call it internal alchemy, but there's a book that I believe Carl Jung was actually obsessed with alchemy, by the way, which I learned the other day that he was also a CIA asset.
Man, all these you know, really high level scientists, philosophers, all the people that they put up really high in the mainstream on a pedestal, all these guys were occultists, you know, in behind closed doors, you know.
And maybe not them, but the guys that they were working for 100% were occultists, right? So yeah, I did a deep dive on MK Ultra the other day, which is really mind blowing. So the Taoist text, Secret of the Golden Flower, it talks about an immortal spirit body of gold formed from the germinal vesicle of the solar plex through meditation by cultivating one's chi, so your astrolite or vital fluids within the body. And what it says was that you take the outflowing energy that's coming out from your body, and through meditation, you're able to force it back in. So through the practice of celibacy, not putting your sperm out there. Eventually, all of that inside of your body, your energy and your seminal fluid, so your sperm and everything, hardens into a little crystallized little being, a little man, right? Similar to like the alchemical homunculus. And the purpose of this little golden little man that forms inside of you after years of meditation and learning to reverse your chi back into itself is that it's going to live on for you for forever after you die, after your body rots away, and you're not going to be susceptible to samsara or reincarnation. So very interesting. Where this is 2nd century BCE, as far back as 8th century BCE, which is way back, and they're talking about creating within yourself a golden little person. And it made me think of, to share another picture here. I don't know if you saw this. I know Rogan's talked about it before, but this this is a golden statue of a Buddha that was found, and they had it on display for a while, and then they found out that inside of it, can you see that?
Yeah.
Inside of it was a person that mummified themselves.
No.
Yeah. Yes. So it's got a name. I forget the name, but essentially these monks, they mummify themselves for 3 years. I don't know how hardcore you are, Chris, but are you mummify yourself from the inside out for 3 straight years and literally starve yourself to death, and then encase yourself in a golden statue hardcore? I don't know.
I don't think I'm that hardcore, no. But how the hell would you mummify yourself from the inside out?
Eating a certain diet, doing certain, again, they're meditating and eating a certain diet, bro. It takes 3 years, and they dry themselves out in a way where they don't rot after they go on. But it made me think, as soon as I read that, I'm like, little golden man, well, these guys were kind of sort of doing, again, maybe this was a metaphorical thing where they would be encased in a golden man in order to escape the reincarnation process.
Well, you don't have to worry about lice. You'll be nice and dry.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just connecting things that, outside the box, and just trying to, as I go along in my research, like, wow, that makes sense. Well, that other thing, it might be related. So, okay, I see where that can go from. So the Taoist, which is the little golden man, which is my favorite version of the homunculus. Now, we have Zosimos of Panopolis, which he talks about. He mentions the first homunculus in a text. He is the oldest. He wrote the oldest known literature on alchemy, and he was a follower of Hermes Trismegistus. And I'm going to read the little excerpt in which he talks about it. And as he was saying these things, and if you can check this out, On Virtue by Zosimos, there's a really good book on. I can send it to you on this subject.
Right on.
He is describing this spirit world that he's in, right? He's dreaming all this, but it's so vivid. It's like he's walking through. It reminds me of Dante's Inferno, but he gets to a part where he's talking to a priest in a flask. And again, this is very symbolic. So this is alchemy. This is going to be enshrouded in symbology because it is alchemy. So as he was saying these things and I was pressing him to talk, his eyes became like blood and he vomited forth his flesh. And I saw him change into a mutilated anthroparian, biting himself and wounding himself with his own teeth. Seized with fear, I thought, it is not thus that the composition of the waters is produced. And I was convinced that I had understood well. So again, it's very cryptic because it is alchemy. But you have this anthroparian, which is what scholars refer to as a pseudo homunculus. So that's the first mention of a homunculus in alchemy. Like, okay, this is a concept of a homunculus. Mm-hmm. And then I talked about at the beginning what the quote from Fulcanelli, where alchemists they seek to strip bare the world's secrets to break it down to the building blocks and rearrange them. So it's doing the great work, right? As you're doing it, you're affecting reality on some sort of level. Now, we have Jabir bin Hayyan, which is the father of modern chemistry. So again, 8th century Persian sage. This guy was not just any run-of-the-mill guy. This guy invented the acid that goes in your battery in your car. Okay, this is the guy that came up with that. And he was writing about homunculus. Not calling them homunculus, again, because we haven't gotten there, but he wrote over 3,000 research papers and articles, treatises, and more than 70 books were translated into other languages from his work. So this is a very influential guy, and he was talking about how to recreate products of nature. Because again, as long as it's in nature, it's okay. So the Christians can do it, any religion can do it, and you can imitate precious metals, stones, plants, animals, and you guessed it, man, a little man. And this guy, the reason I brought him in is because he was very, very influential, and he created what I dubbed the homunculus rotisserie machine, where he had these concentric spheres. And now this is going to get controversial with those flat earthers, but he believed that the spheres represented the celestial bodies. And he had a little mold, had 2 legs, 2 arms, the body. And of course, he would mix it up with sperm. You would put it in the various molds, seal it up, heat it up, let it putrefy, and you would plug it into this rotisserie machine, and all these spheres would turn, and all these cogs and stuff would turn around, and then eventually you would have, depending on the shape of the mold and the size, determines the outcome of the homunculus. And they vary from a young girl with a boy's face to an adolescence with the intelligence of a man.
Jeez.
And after the fact, he goes on to describe different schools of methods. So in order to make a winged man, you would take the sperm of man and mix it with the blood of a bird. Or if you wanted to do, so they were doing experiments, bro. They were going at it and making experiments back in the 8th century. Okay. So this is not, something that's new. It's been occulted, but it's not new. It's definitely out there if you do the research.
And sperm was a popular ingredient back then, eh?
It was, yeah. For Aristotle, was like the nectar of the gods.
Sperm and blood.
They call it the foamy substance that had all this power, and it's like it started with Aristotle giving sperm this power that led all these other guys like, hey, if we can, if it makes a man inside the womb of a woman, what happens when we put in a cow? He started mixing it with other things. So we're gonna get to the idea of the Jewish homunculus, the Jewish golem. And I know we talked about it a little bit earlier, but the story that I picked, because there's various stories pertaining to this concept, but the Golem of Prague is my favorite. And I think maybe one of the more famous ones, Rabbi Judai Lo ben Bezalel. And in the 16th century, this guy met up with John Dee, by the way, John Dee, Rudolph II, all these guys. This guy was famous for that. And the reason that he made the homunculus was because of anti-Semitic attacks from Rudolph II in the ghettos. So he made this golem, and it would protect the ghetto. And it had the word Amet, meaning truth, on its forehead. And every night he would erase the E, and it would make Met, meaning death. So it was, again, the rebirth every day. So this is the first time that you start to get this idea that you need to kill the homunculus or golem in order to use it again. So this eternal reoccurrence, the phoenix, right, that is always born again from its ashes. So over and over again, right, every day, except one night, Rabbi Judai Lo forgot to do this, forgot to erase the letter to kill the golem. And it went on a rampage. It started to kill everybody and started to destroy the entire ghetto. And eventually he was able to subdue it and killed it. And they said that it was stored in the attic of a synagogue, which I think is still standing. I forgot the name of it. But in some stories, the rabbi is killed when the golem crashes down because it kept growing. Again, typical Frankenstein's monster, where he goes around killing his entire family. He tells him, I will visit you on your wedding night. I will get rid of everybody that you've ever known and loved, and I will destroy them, and I will destroy you, right? Frankenstein monster goes out of control, and that's the typical AI
Hollywood has warned from the beginning about making creatures or creations are things you shouldn't mess with, and how they're just going to take on a life of their own and destroy everyone on the planet. And it's like every AI story, every robot story, Frankenstein, every mad scientist.
From stories like this.
Yeah.
That sprouted from stories like this. So Hollywood got it from somewhere, and they got it from this. From these ancient texts. So eventually he kills it. On some stories, the golem falls on the rabbi, kills him. And Paracelsian scholar Walter Pagel argues that the story of the homunculus was the predecessor. The story of the golem may have been the predecessor to the Paracelsian homunculus, which is the Mac Daddy, the one that coined the term homunculus. Because throughout all the centuries that I've talked about, the word homunculus has never been said until the 16th century. And the reason I picked Rabbi Judai Lo ben Bezalel was because at JPL, where Parsons, D. Jack Parsons was, and I know we did the Parsons episode on your show. His mentor was allegedly what he boasted about being a descendant of this rabbi, the famous Rabbi Judai Lo that created the Golem in Prague. And it's interesting that Parsons would go on to try and manifest his own homunculus. So very interesting connection there. And that's why I put this particular version of it, because I relate to Parsons, which I've done research on. Now, on the topic of religious magic, the whole idea behind the golem was to show the power of the Hebrew language, the letters, religious magic. In the Talmud, Adam was first created as a golem. And it's just a boasting about the power that this language has. You have the tetragrammaton and all these things. And first came the word and all these things. So I don't know if you want to touch on Jesus is the homunculus, because that's the one that really also gets people. But I just want to say that it's not my idea. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
This is from the 15th century that this idea has been around. So we're going to step it back a century.
I had a guest talking about how Jesus was Satan before. So, you're
talking about,
you're not the worst one.
I've had him on too, bro. I know exactly who you're talking about. So the 15th century Spanish theologian Alonso Tostalo and Thomas Aquina, theologian, and the other guy was a doctor of the church. But Tostalo proposed that Mary was the sealed vessel. So the sealed house, the sealed alchemical vessel, the sealed jar, that she was it, because again, it was a virgin birth, right? There was no coitus, no sexual intercourse. And again, it's a variation from the traditional homunculus, but there was no semen present, but Mary did have menstrual blood. So he argues that she would not have had enough blood for the full development of Jesus in the womb. Therefore, he would have been a condensed version of a miniature version of a baby or of a man. And according to Aristotelian biology and the alchemical process, Jesus was conceived as a homunculus, a miniature human kept in a sealed vessel from the first instant of creation. Now, this other guy, Thomas Aquina, argued against that and said, hey, there's no need for sperm because the Holy Spirit was infinitely powerful and could fashion matter into any form instantly. All right. Which, touche, that's a good argument too, right? If the Holy Spirit is all powerful, sure, it could do these things. It could make a person out of nothing. And that's fine, except people in the Renaissance era, they went ahead and were doing things like this, painting Jesus as a little man, as the definition of a homunculus is miniature man. So we have versions of Jesus and the Madonna, right? The painting. And Jesus has his little scroll here, has this nice little set of hair. Man. And he was, by definition, he's ripped here. He's got some baldness going on.
Jesus is a ripped little dude.
Yeah, Tripley called him the Brogan here. So here we have this guy. And that one looks more like a baby, but there's other weird ones where he's like got like either the shading, like you think that
he's got 5 o'clock shadow.
If you're painting the Messiah, one of the most important figures in history, arguably, you think that you'd get him right. You know what I mean? You think that you get his mom right and his shading and everything right, except no. So one of the reasonings that they had behind this, kind of creepy. One of the reasons that they had behind painting him as a more sophisticated being was because they said, hey, this is the Messiah. People aren't gonna want to get behind a little baby. So he needs to be sophisticated. Our Messiah needs to be a miniature man. Let's make him more sophisticated. It's, baby boss. Let's put him in a suit and let's make him look good.
That's one of my favorite representations of Jesus is the baby Jesus.
The baby Jesus. And these guys could not It cannot come together. And so by definition, in the 15th century, again, according to Alonso Tostalo and Thomas Aquina, I know it's very blasphemous, but fuck it, we're on the Forbidden Knowledge News, which we can get weird on here. So, so with all that said, as we approach the end here, I want to talk about the Paracelsian homunculus, which he's the one during this entire time that said homunculus, and his name was Philippus Areolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim.
Dude,
that's the dude's name.
That's a wonderful name right there.
That's a wonderful.
That's a mouthful.
Name. Yeah, and they dubbed him Paracelsus. And in the 16th century, he was a German-Swiss physician, alchemist, and again, very influential person. He established the role of chemistry in medicine, and he also helped establish a lot of things that we use in modern day surgery. By the way, he was also an army surgeon. So this guy was eccentric. Paracelsus was very eccentric. And if I could recommend a book, would be this book here. It's one of my references, The Devil's Doctor by Philip Ball. And I got some notes and stuff here. But anyways, it goes on his entire life. And this guy, he was very eccentric. He would do public book burnings of people that he didn't agree with. And I think he was a homunculus. He was 5 foot tall, had wide hips, a deformed cranium, and there is some conspiracies as to what he was. And I've said it before. I'm probably not gonna say it because it's kind of dark, but anyways, you can look that up yourself. But this guy was the first one to talk about making these weird animals, and he started with the making of let me find it here in the book, De Natura Rerum, which is, he talks about taking what I said about the chickens, where they take the egg and they incubate it and it putrefies into a little chicken. He also said that if you took the ashes of a bird and you injected it into an egg, you would get a bird. You obviously know that is a lie, so I don't know. And he talked about creating Paracelsian monsters. And the first one that he created was a basilisk. Now, I don't know if you know what a basilisk is, but it's like this dragon type of thing where its glance will kill you. Now, he made it with the menstrual blood of a woman sealed up in a flask and heated to a temperature of a horse's womb. And the basilisk is considered the monster above all monsters because its glance can kill, just like the glance of a menstruating woman who has also a hidden poison in her eyes. By the way, this guy hated sex. This guy hated women. This guy was a misogynist.
I'm kind of getting that.
And again, yeah, there's other conspiracies that he was, homosexual. There's other conspiracies that he was a hermaphrodite again. And that's the homosexual thing is a rumor. And then the hermaphrodite thing is backed up by what is allegedly his skeleton from anatomical. They did a study on his skeleton. So again, you can take that for what it is, but
you may have been an angry little homunculus.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. So he took this and he's like, okay, so if I can make a basilisk from the menstrual blood of a woman, I can take sperm. And back then they thought that inside a sperm was a little man. So preformationism is the idea that everything exists in a miniature version inside the world. So a big man was actually a little version in a sperm. And there's pictures of little men like this in sperm. That's what they thought, because they didn't have microscopes, bro. So they're going based off observations and things. So he said, okay, if I take the menstrual blood, it came from a woman, I made a basilisk, the craziest monster. Let me take the sperm, and here it is. We must now by no means forget the generation of homunculi. This is the first time a homunculus has been dropped, right? The word homunculus, like, wow, okay, here we are. For there is something to it, although it has been kept in great secrecy and kept hidden up to now. And there was not a little doubt and question among of old philosophers whether it even be possible to nature and art that a man can be born outside the female body and without a natural mother. I give this answer that it is by no means opposed to the spagyric art and to nature, but that it is indeed possible. But how this should happen and proceed, its process is thus: that the sperm of a man be putrefied by itself in a cucurbit for 40 days with the highest degree of putrefaction in a horse's womb, or at least so long that it comes to life and moves itself and stirs, which is easily observed. After this time, it will look somewhat like a man, but transparent without a body. If after this, it be fed wisely with the acronym of human blood and be nourished up to 40 weeks. So it makes me think of vampires too, right? Feeding it bloods, and be kept in the even heat of a horse's womb, a living human child grows therefrom, with all its members like another child, which is born of a woman, but much smaller. Now, the homunculus to Paracelsus was this little miniature god. And why is that? Because it was pure. It wasn't tainted by the poisonous mixture from which the bacillus came from. So from the menstrual blood. He was saying, like, this is a pure being. Wow. Because there's no menstrual blood involved. That's what they thought back then, that babies were created with the menstrual blood and all that stuff. And when people were having sex, they believed that there was a battle between the menstrual blood and the sperm. And of the sperm one, you had a boy, and of the menstrual blood one, you had a girl. That's what they thought, bro. This is crazy stuff. Shit. And to him, this was like a little miniature god, right? The homunculus, according to Paracelsus, that reaches adulthood is said to become a marvelous being like a giant or a dwarf. So we were talking about earlier, the cryptids. Yeah. Makes you think of where they come from. They have supernatural strength and know all things hidden and secret things. Wow. They receive, and the reason for that being is because they receive their life from art, which is alchemy. Through art, they receive their body, flesh, bone, and blood. Through art, they are born, and therefore art is embodied and inborn in them, and they need learn it from no one. So this guy was having like some awakening as he was making these homunculi, and it gets into the ethical aspects of it, because there's also the ethical aspect of the homunculi. The Alonso Tosala guy talked about the Arnaldian homunculus, where it was this, again, a theologian of the church, and he would, this is according to the story, make homunculus. And as soon as the homunculus would come to life, he would destroy them. And the reason that he did that was because he said, hey, I don't know if God died for that homunculus' sins, because these were very religious people for the time. I don't know if God is going to give it a soul. What is a soul? Do homunculus have souls? Well, he believed that homunculus was a vessel until God put a soul into it. So before God could put a soul into it, he would just kill it. And that's the Arnaldian homunculus. Arnaldus de Villanova is the guy. And ultimately, Paracelsus goes on to this whole thing about the only time that you need to spend your seed is inside the womb of a woman, inside during sex. Otherwise, if you are to put your sperm anywhere else other than the womb of a woman, it becomes a monster. And that's where we get the Paracelsian monsters. So maybe Bigfoot, maybe that sock that you had under your bed, Chris, during high school.
That old sock is like Godzilla right now, man.
Exactly. So Paracelsus went on to say, hey, the only way to combat, even by having the thoughts of lust, because he was very religious, of lust after a woman and controlling yourself is not enough. You need to castrate yourself. Yeah. You need to cut them off. And that's how you're going to stop your breeding of what he considered Paracelsian monsters. So again, very radical, but mind you, this guy had some anatomically things wrong with him in his body that he didn't understand. So again, there's that conspiracy. Now it brings me to the final thing, where I tie it into modern day, and I call it the Crowley connection, however you want to say it. Aleister Crowley in 1914 wrote a book called Vel de Homunculo, of the homunculus. And it's funny because culo means ass in Spanish. But anyways, he gave instructions on how to make a homunculus. I mentioned earlier that magical systems can be transformed and changed throughout the entire since the beginning of time until now to fit your need. And he said that you can, up until the second month of gestation, the fetus doesn't have a soul up until the second month, but on the third month, it does have a soul. So In the first 2 months, you're able to, again, use the fetus as a talisman and invoke a certain type of energy. That's what the Thelemites were all about, right? Thelemic magic and all this stuff, invoking the era of Horus and all the Aeon of Horus and all this stuff. So he gave instructions on how to do it, and it needed to be in the middle of a desert, in the middle of nowhere, because he believed that wandering souls that wanted to reincarnate were less prevalent there in the middle of the desert. And after the you need to make sure that the astrological signs are aligned, and the woman and the man that are having sex, they're invoking energies, et cetera, et cetera. It's a whole magical process. So essentially, it's a baby made under a magical ceremony. And when the woman got pregnant, she was to be put in a consecrated circle and held there until she had the baby. And every day they would invoke this energy and all this stuff. And so that's Crowley writing about it. He wrote a book called The Moon Child, which is just about that. It is a fight between two sects of occultist magicians that were fighting over an unborn child. It makes you think of Rosemary's Baby. You have Crowley inspired Parsons, which Parsons went on to do the Babylon working ritual, where he was trying to invoke the whore Babylon, the Scarlet Woman, a female homunculus, which technically is a femunculus. He wanted to bring her into this world, this reality, which they thought it was Margie Cameron. After Margie Cameron died, after Parsons died, Margie Cameron went on to start her own cult called The Children, where they were trying to make an interracial moon child, a sort of homunculus again. And Margie Cameron was in bed with the likes of, there's connections to the Manson murders. You have Kenneth Anger. You have all these guys in there, which again, it fueled the Satanic Panic. You have other connections and other crazy conspiracies, but we have the connection with Parsons, the homunculus, and then Margie Cameron kept it on. And I believe that, let me pull up here. I believe that, before this, let me share my screen real quick. You had the Trinity experiment, the atomic experiment, which according to, look for the note, according to James Shelby Downer, believed that a homunculus was inside the almost 500,000 pound giant steel bottle named Jumbo that the U.S. government placed near Ground Zero on July 16, 1945 at the Trinity site in New Mexico, the land of enchantment. And
can you pull up that picture again?
Yeah, I'm going to pull it up again here, right there. So there's this big container that allegedly in here, they were trying to radioactively make a homunculus with the first atomic bomb that was blown up at the Trinity site in New Mexico, the land of enchantment, along the 33rd parallel. And check this out. This is the Trinity site. Well, what's this? It looks like it's actually a 15-sided shape, which also has some sort of sacred geometry thing, which I'm not going to get into, but you could say it's the consecrated circle, right? That Crowley was talking about.
Interesting.
Now, I relate this to because about 100 or so miles away, I could be wrong on the exact miles, your boy Epstein had the Zorro Ranch. Now, this ranch is 33,339 square feet. Interesting number, right?
Yeah.
And allegedly at this ranch, they had elite royalty come, and they would molest people, sexually assault them. And in the basement, they had an entire floor dedicated to the computers, and that they would record the things that would happen in these rooms. Now, if you look at where it is, this reminds me eerily of, can you see that?
No, I'm still seeing the first picture you pulled up.
I don't know why it's not letting me pull up the other one. Hold on. This picture, let me just share screen 3. Here we go. You see that? So this here reminds me of the consecrated circle that Crowley was talking about, because at this property, Epstein was trying to allegedly impregnate 20 women at a time. This is 2019, okay?
Right.
So Epstein wanted to impregnate 20 women at a time to what he said was a master race that he wanted to create. Well, check it out. Look at where this is at. This is in the middle of nowhere. There was at one point over 10,000 acres that this ranch sat on, nestled into these mountains here in the middle of nowhere. Well, that follows. Remember what I mentioned earlier about architecture contributing to magical practices? Whoa, what better way to make a moonchild than by following your boy Crowley's instructions than by having all the money that you can in the world, doing whatever you want to do. Hey, why don't we just give it a try?
Yeah.
Why don't we know that these guys were transhumanists. We know that they were messing with the occult. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So it's not too far-fetched to think that D. Epstein was trying to create his own version of a moonchild. And I go as far as to even relate it to, because by definition, there is IVF, which IVF could count as artificially growing a person outside of the matrix, outside of the womb.
Right, yeah.
And in putting it into the vessel, into the sealed container. Well, you have all these elites, like the Kardashians in particular. They're all using surrogates for some reason.
Surrogates. That's what I wanted to make sure we got to. That's the thing that I was just thinking about. That's like surrogates, clones, and, things like that. It is a modern version of everything you've been talking about. I think that we are still practicing a lot of these things unknowingly, and especially at elite levels in Hollywood with the surrogates and things like that. But I think it's definitely something to this, especially at high levels.
Well, why do you think the Frankenstein's called Frankenstein the modern Prometheus? Because, again, the modern time, and it makes you think of why they pushed Dahmer. Why was Dahmer collecting so many body parts and preserving them? Was he trying to make his own Frankenstein that's inspired from he wanted a lover to keep forever, right? What a better way than he broke the taboos of the taboos. He was killing people, right? That's one of the biggest taboos you could do in order to use, again, bodily. What we talked about earlier, the Liber Vacant was using various human body parts, and that's not even the darkest grimoire that you can find. If you really want to get into a dark grimoire, look up the Picatrix, one of the more famous grimoires, and they quite literally use even your toenail clippings for magical purposes. So by keeping skulls, what's Skull and Bones all about? They keep skulls for what? Because they believe keeping the essence of the person there. You have the whole Geronimo connection there. It's very occultic. You have the crystal skulls. You have a whole bunch of ideas that are intertwined that I believe sprouted from this original idea of this little magical man. There's stories. Again, Crowley wrote that Moonchild story. Was it a story, or was it an actual account? Because occultists do that. They'll write stories in order to occult the actual things that they're doing. So who knows? All these Rosemary's Baby. There's all these movies about incarnating. Look at that. That guy. I was gonna say Pelosi. Roman Polanski.
Yeah.
Roman Polanski.
Pelosi too.
Yeah, they're all lizards. He had a movie about, sexually assaulting a child, but doing these things to a child, and it turns out that he had done it, right? And he had to flee because he had done the exact thing that he did, that this character did in a movie. He had done it in real life. And what was that movie about? About invoking, right, Satan's baby inside of her. So the Antichrist, Marjorie Cameron was talking about how her daughter, when she got pregnant from these rituals, was the wormwood star. You have the wormwood, and although it ended in a miscarriage, but they thought that these babies were going to bring forth the end of times. So it's a very deep rabbit hole, and it gets dark. But like I'm saying, this is nothing new. This is not anything that I just stumbled. It's been, and I think it's evolved from the beginning all the way to what we have today.
Well, speaking of evolution, I want to close on your thoughts on this. The ultimate technological homunculus. Could it be the metaverse where we're putting our biological selves, our materials, our thoughts, our consciousness into this metaverse, combining it with everybody else's consciousness, and maybe making this new technological type of golem entity that may be the new techno homunculus? What do you think about that?
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. If you really want to, not so much of a stretch, but thought forms and astral
Yeah.
projections and all these different, thoughts that are projected out are considered homunculus too, because they are artificially created in a way. So if you have the idea of the skinwalker, could also be some sort of homunculus or concept of a homunculus. You have the Watiko, which is also a concept of a homunculus. There are, various forms, but absolutely do I think that there's a story that I have that's tied to Daedalus, where they use, again, I love this idea that I've been toying with, the Full Metal Alchemist, where their alchemy is doing the work to affect reality. Well, the Daedalus talked about how these shiny things, you have the Transformers, and you have Daddy Musk putting out a robot that's named Optimus, by the way, how these talismans, these machines, AI, the Terminator, whatever, are able to warp people's perceptions real time. So I'm in that school where, yes, is technology another sort of golem or another sort of a type of homunculus, with the aspect of homunculus meaning little man thrown out. Absolutely, it's some sort of AI or cybernetic being entity that is artificially created. We're going to keep that aspect of the homunculus, the artificial creation of it. Absolutely. And are they trying to? I believe that they're trying to take our energy and lock us in, and putting a reality over our reality. Because I'm not gonna lie, dude, I partake in the dark arts sometime, and I'll jump in, right? I'll jump into the metaverse, and I'll observe, because again, I'm a scholar, so I observe, and I do it for research purposes. But the problem with, the difference between me and a regular person is that, not saying that I'm a holy, but I understand it's a game. There's some people who live, eat, breathe the virtual reality, and they can't decipher the two. And that's why it's so important. That's why I have my podcast, where I try to bring awareness. I do the dirty work for you, so you don't have to plug into the metaverse, and I observe things within it, right? In order to, from a scholarly perspective, tell you about it without you having to, go in there and it's honestly not that bad. I'm not going to be an advocate, but it's funny, dude. But some people, unfortunately, they get too wrapped up in it because they're not able to decipher between the two.
I was sexually assaulted by a homunculus in the metaverse.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, exactly. So there are people who have sex in VR chat, and sure. I think it's like erotic VR or something like that. But that's some people's realities, unfortunately, because I do think that they feed off of how easily some people are able to be manipulated, and addictions and things like that. But that's the way, what I call the reptilian overlords. I think that's the way that they operate, and they definitely, they thrive off of that, that negative energy that you give out when you ruin your entire life because of something like that, something that's meant to be not taken. It's one thing to know that you're in a game versus to know that you're not in a game. How David Icke says, it's one thing to touch and feel the bars, and another thing to not be able to see the bars where you're still in a prison. So I think I want to bring awareness about that. Like, hey, listen, wake up, be aware of your surroundings. A lot of these things aren't going to be literal. They're going to be shrouded in symbols, and symbols are the language of the soul. And symbols are an entire different language to those who are initiated, and those who are not initiated aren't going to understand it. So that's why I think it's so important to talk about these things and bring awareness, because unfortunately that's a lives some people live where they're not able to decipher from the two.
Right on. Awesome, man. This was fantastic. I love the deep dives you're doing. Keep it up. We'll have you back on in the future for another one. Before you head out, let the audience know again where they can find all your stuff, social media, good stuff.
At the Juan on Juan podcast, thejuanonjuanpodcast.com. I also write about different esoteric and occulted subjects, the Occultist Monday. It is a sort of zine journal type of thing. I got we're writing about adrenochrome, the homunculus, reptilian biology, the history of the alphabet, bibliomancy, divination, all these good stuff in here. I release it monthly. I have to release the November issue. Find that on my website. And then I have a comic book too, The Chosen Juan versus the Saturnian Cube, issue number 1. Issue number 2 is going to be out very soon. And like I said, Tripley's in it, and it's really funny. So yeah, find me anywhere you can find your podcast. I do have a YouTube channel, the Juan Juan Podcast, where I post my video versions on there, and I do presentations, and I do deep dives. If you're interested in weird stuff like this, Chris's show is great, right? He's cranking. I don't know how you do it, bro. You're cranking them out, and I'm trying to keep up with you, bro. But yeah, I do deep dives, and I like to bring a different perspective from a lot of the topics that we overlap with each other, right? I know we collab and all this stuff, but I like to bring a different perspective, even though we're gonna be talking about the same thing. Open up another side of it and be like, hey, maybe if we look at it from this point of view, what does that mean? You know what I mean? So
That's what we need, man. Open
like having
discussion.
a good time.
It's great.
Yep, sure.
For sure. This was fantastic, Juan, and we will definitely be doing it again in the future. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. See y'all then.